Your profit margins are too low, and I can see at least 3 areas for immediate cost cutting, the man in the expensive suit declared, tapping his tablet screen. Starting with employee compensation. I sat across the desk, stunned into silence as Brian Hayes, the new regional manager from Brightpaw Veterinary Partners, explained how my career of 14 years at Oakwood Animal Clinic was now worth exactly 60% of my current salary. Nothing personal, Dr. Langdon. Just business, he said with a practiced smile. We need to align your compensation with industry standards. My name is Jessica Langdon. I'm 41 years old and have dedicated my entire professional life to the animals of Lexington, Kentucky. What started as a job at a small family-owned veterinary practice straight out of vet school had grown into something I poured my heart and soul into. I was the one who'd helped the clinic grow from a 2-room operation to the trusted community fixture it had become. I understand this is a transition period, I replied calmly, though my heart was pounding. When would these changes take effect? Next pay cycle, Brian answered, already looking back at his tablet. We'll need your decision by Friday. When old Dr. Harrington decided to retire and sell the practice, we'd all been nervous. But he'd assured us that Brightpaw would maintain the clinic's values. They understand what we've built here, he'd said during the announcement dinner. Now, 3 weeks after the sale was finalized, I was facing a choice between a massive pay cut or walking away from the practice that felt like my second home, where I'd trained every vet tech, where I knew hundreds of pets by name, where clients specifically requested me for their animals' care. I appreciate your transparency, I said, standing up. I'll have my decision for you by Friday. Brian nodded without looking up. As I walked toward the door, he called after me. Oh, and Jessica? We're implementing a new scheduling system next week. The training manual is in your email. Outside his office, I paused by the reception desk where Valerie was updating patient records. She'd been our receptionist for 12 years, and her concerned expression told me she already knew. You too? I asked quietly. She nodded. 30% cut, plus reduced hours. What are you going to do? I whispered, mindful of the clients in the waiting room. Valerie glanced at the families with their beloved pets. A golden retriever patiently sitting beside an elderly man, a woman cradling a cat carrier, a child petting a rabbit in her lap. I don't know yet, she replied, but something tells me things are about to change around here, and not for the better. A sense of resolve began building inside me. This wasn't just about my salary. This was about everything we'd built, everything we stood for. I looked around at the clinic that had been my life's work and knew that something had to be done. I've always believed that being a good veterinarian means more than just medical expertise. It's about relationships. With animals, yes, but equally with their humans. Over 14 years, I'd vaccinated puppies and later helped those same dogs cross the Rainbow Bridge. I'd sent handwritten sympathy cards after difficult losses and celebrated miraculous recoveries. My cell phone number was saved in countless family contacts as Dr. Jessica for emergency consultations. My apartment walls were covered with thank you cards and photos of pets I'd treated. The refrigerator displayed drawings from children whose animals I'd saved. These weren't just clients. They were connections that ran deep. You've worked with Brightpaw before, right? I asked Thomas, our newest veterinarian, during lunch the following day. At 32, he'd joined us 6 months ago after working at a corporate practice in Nashville. He nodded grimly. 3 years. It always starts the same. Cost cutting, then efficiency improvements, then pressure to upsell services. And the care quality? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Everything becomes about numbers, he replied. How many patients you see per hour, how many additional services you sell, how much revenue you generate. He pushed his salad around. That's why I left. Got tired of being told to recommend unnecessary dental procedures to meet monthly targets. Later that afternoon, between appointments, I called Dr. Harrington. After 30 years of practice, He'd retired to a cabin by the lake, where he spent his days fishing and writing the veterinary memoir he'd always talked about. "I had no idea, Jessica," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Their representatives assured me they valued the practice's culture. I would never have sold if I'd known." "It's not your fault," I assured him. "You deserved your retirement. I need to make a decision." "What are you thinking?" he asked. I hesitated. The idea had been forming in my mind, but saying it aloud would make it real. "I'm considering opening my own practice." The silence on the line lasted only a moment. "You should," he finally said. "You've got the experience, the client relationships, and Lexington could use a clinic that still puts care above corporate margins." After we hung up, I sat in my office, looking at the degrees and certifications on the wall. My mind drifted to conversations with clients over the years, many of whom had expressed how grateful they were that we weren't one of those assembly line vet clinics. My thoughts were interrupted by a knock. It was Maggie, our head technician for the past 8 years. "Sorry to bother you, Dr. Langdon, but Mrs. Peterson is here with Baxter. She specifically asked for you, even though she's technically scheduled with Dr. Morris today." "Tell her I'll be right there," I said, standing up. As I prepared to examine the 10-year-old beagle I'd been treating since he was a puppy, I realized what I needed to do. The decision wasn't just about my salary anymore. It was about preserving something that mattered. Friday morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I had spent my evenings researching commercial real estate, equipment costs, and small business loans. I'd called 3 former colleagues who had successfully established their own practices. The more I explored the possibility, the more right it felt. I knocked on Brian's door at precisely 9 o'clock. "Come in," he called, his voice distracted. I entered to find him video conferencing with someone, his back half turned to the door. "I'll call you back," he told the screen before swiveling to face me. "Jessica, good. Have you made your decision?" "I have," I replied, handing him an envelope. "This is my 2 weeks' notice." His professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine surprise. "You're quitting? Over a standard market adjustment?" "I'm pursuing a new opportunity," I corrected him. "And I wanted to inform you properly, with time to arrange coverage for my patients." Brian leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You know, I expected this reaction from some of the support staff, but not from you. You're a senior veterinarian. This is how corporate acquisitions work. Everyone needs to adjust." "I understand business realities," I said carefully. "And I've made a business decision of my own." He shrugged, already reaching for my resignation letter. "We'll have HR prepare your exit paperwork. I assume you'll be joining another practice?" "Something like that," I answered vaguely. The news of my resignation spread through the clinic like wildfire. By lunchtime, Valerie, Maggie, and Thomas had all found moments to pull me aside. "Is it true?" Valerie asked, her voice barely above a whisper as we stood by the filing cabinets. "Yes," I confirmed. "My last day is 2 weeks from today." "What will you do?" she pressed. I hesitated before deciding to trust her with the truth. "I'm opening my own practice. I've been looking at a space over on Maple Avenue." Her eyes widened. "Really? That's..." She glanced around and lowered her voice further. "That's amazing, Jessica." Throughout the day, similar conversations followed. Thomas expressed interest immediately. "Keep me posted," he said meaningfully during a brief moment between patients. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, making lists and plans. My phone buzzed with a text from Maggie. "Whatever you're planning, count me in." It wasn't until my 3rd cup of tea that the severity of what happened earlier hit me. As I was leaving for the day, Mrs. Davidson had stopped me in the parking lot. Her Maine Coon, Oliver, had been my patient since she adopted him 6 years ago. "I overheard one of the techs saying you're leaving," she said, genuine distress in her voice. Is it true? When I confirmed it, her response was immediate. Where are you going? Because Oliver and I will follow you there. That simple declaration of loyalty made me realize something I hadn't fully appreciated before. I wasn't just a veterinarian to these people and their pets. I was their veterinarian. And that bond meant something. Something Brightpaw had severely undervalued. Staring at my notes, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about refusing an unfair pay cut anymore. This was about creating something better, a practice that would honor the trust these families had placed in me. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my career. I maintained absolute professionalism, treating each animal with the same care I always had, but an undercurrent of tension ran through every interaction with management. Brian had taken to hovering during my appointments, clipboard in hand, making notes about efficiency opportunities. He scheduled an exit interview for my final day and emailed daily reminders about my continuing obligation to non-solicitation of clients and employees, a clause that, upon review with a lawyer friend, turned out to be largely unenforceable in Kentucky. What Brian didn't know was that I'd already signed a lease on a storefront just 7 minutes across town. The space had previously been a pediatrician's office, meaning much of the necessary infrastructure was already in place. I'd secured financing through a local bank where I'd been a customer for over a decade, and equipment suppliers I'd worked with for years offered favorable terms for the new practice. We value relationships too, my medical supplier rep told me during a discreet lunch meeting. And frankly, we've seen what happens to quality when Brightpaw takes over. We're happy to support independent practices. In the clinic, I maintained a careful silence about my plans, but word was spreading regardless. Clients would ask pointed questions during appointments. So, where exactly will your new practice be located? Mrs. Thompson asked while I examined her terrier's ear infection. I haven't finalized anything yet, I replied carefully, aware of the microphone on the computer system that had been installed the previous week as part of Brightpaw's quality assurance program. She lowered her voice. Well, when you do, please let me know. Max won't see anyone else. These conversations happened daily, and each one strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just making a career move. I was preserving a standard of care that mattered to the community. On Wednesday of my final week, Brian called me into his office again. His demeanor had changed, the corporate confidence replaced by barely concealed irritation. Several clients have been asking about your future plans, he said without preamble. I need to remind you of your contractual obligations. I'm aware of my obligations, I replied calmly. And I've been clear with everyone that I don't have concrete plans to announce. He tapped his pen against the desk. We've invested considerably in acquiring this practice, Dr. Langdon. Brightpaw won't look kindly on any attempts to undermine that investment. I understand, I said. Is there anything else? He studied me for a moment. We're prepared to reconsider your compensation package. Perhaps we were too aggressive with the initial adjustment. The offer caught me off guard. It was the first sign that perhaps Brightpaw was recognizing their miscalculation. But it was too late. The lease was signed, equipment ordered, and my vision for Riverbank Animal Hospital was already taking shape. I appreciate that, Brian, but my decision is made. Later that afternoon, Valerie slipped a folded note onto my desk. Inside was a list of 20 client names with a simple message. These people called today specifically asking about you. At the bottom, she'd added, when you're ready to hire a receptionist, call me first. That evening, I met Thomas and Maggie at a coffee shop several miles from the clinic, far enough to avoid running into anyone from Brightpaw. Over lattes, I finally shared my plans in detail. I've secured a location on Riverbank Drive, I told them. It'll be called Riverbank Animal Hospital, opening in about 6 weeks if everything goes according to schedule. 6 weeks, Maggie repeated, her expression thoughtful. My reduction in hours takes effect in 3. Interesting timing. Thomas leaned forward. What's your staffing plan? I need a veterinarian who shares my philosophy of care, I said, meeting his gaze directly, and an experienced lead technician. Their smiles told me everything I needed to know. By the time we left the coffee shop, my new practice had unofficially gained its first team members. The pieces were falling into place, but I had no idea that Brightpaw was about to force my hand in a way I never anticipated. My second to last day at Oakwood began with an unwelcome surprise. Posted on the break room bulletin board was a new fee schedule, effective immediately, with price increases averaging 30% across all services. Basic vaccinations that had cost $45 were now $65. Dental cleanings jumped from $300 to $425. More disturbing were the new care packages, highlighted in bold, bundled services that included tests rarely needed for healthy animals. The comprehensive wellness package included 3 separate screens that most pets simply didn't require at routine visits. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," whispered Jenna, a young vet tech who had joined us just before the acquisition. "Dr. Morris already told me we need to recommend the premium package to every client today." My stomach tightened. This wasn't just corporate streamlining anymore. This was exploitative. When Mrs. Whitaker brought in her elderly cat, Chairman Meow, for his arthritis check, I found myself in an impossible position. The new protocols required me to recommend a full senior panel costing nearly $500, despite having run the same tests just 2 months earlier. "Is this really necessary so soon?" Mrs. Whitaker asked, her concern evident. Living on a fixed income, she budgeted carefully for her cat's care. "The new owners have implemented standard protocols," I explained carefully. "But in my professional opinion, given Chairman's recent normal results, we could wait another 4 months for these particular tests." She looked relieved, but my compromise was short-lived. Brian had apparently been monitoring the appointment through the new electronic system. He entered the exam room before I could complete the visit. "Mrs. Whitaker, I'm Brian Hayes, Regional Manager." He introduced himself with a practiced smile. I couldn't help noticing that we haven't scheduled Chairman's senior wellness package today. What followed was a masterclass in pressure tactics, subtle implications that skipping these tests was neglectful, mentions of catching problems early, and finally, the closing offer of a special one-time discount that still exceeded what these tests should actually cost. I watched Mrs. Whitaker's expression shift from confusion to guilt to resignation as she finally agreed, her hands gripping her purse a little tighter. After she left, Brian pulled me aside. "Dr. Langdon, when we recommend a protocol, we expect our veterinarians to support it fully. Those tests are unnecessary right now," I said, keeping my voice low but firm. "This isn't about healthcare. It's about revenue." "This is about standardized care," he countered. "Your personal attachment to clients is clouding your professional judgment." I nearly laughed at the absurdity. My personal attachment to clients is called building trust. It's why this practice has thrived for decades. He checked his watch dismissively. "Well, thankfully we only have to manage that approach for 1 more day." The rest of the day proceeded similarly, with Brian hovering around my appointments and intervening whenever I didn't push the new protocols aggressively enough. By closing time, I was emotionally exhausted. As I was updating Chairman Meow's file, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the notes section, an administrative entry read, "Patient transfer to Dr. Morris effective immediately. Dr. Langdon no longer primary veterinarian." A quick check of several other longtime patients revealed the same change. They were reassigning all of my patients before I'd even left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I'd planned to depart quietly, give myself time to set up my new practice, and only then let clients know of my new location. But Brightpaw's aggressive tactics and willingness to exploit client trust changed everything. At 2:00 a.m., I made a decision. I sat at my computer and drafted an email to the lawyer who'd been helping me establish my new practice. "Need to accelerate timeline," I wrote. "How soon can we open, even in limited capacity?" Her response came surprisingly quickly. "With temporary equipment rental and creative scheduling, Potentially 2 weeks. Call me in the morning. I closed my laptop, finally able to relax enough to sleep. Tomorrow would be my last day at Oakwood Animal Clinic, and it wasn't going to go the way Brian Hayes expected. My final day arrived with a sense of both ending and beginning. I'd spent the early morning hours preparing, making calls, and setting things in motion. Now, as I parked in my usual spot for the last time, I felt strangely calm. The morning passed with a series of emotional goodbyes from staff members who'd become family over the years. Even some of the newer employees, who barely knew me, seemed affected by the shift in the clinic's atmosphere. "The schedule looks light today," Valerie noted when I stopped by reception. Indeed, I had only 4 appointments, unusual for a Friday. "Brian blocked off most of my day for transition activities," I explained. "Apparently, I have a lot of paperwork to complete before I leave." What neither of us said was that my regular clients had already been redistributed among the remaining veterinarians. At noon, Brian summoned me to the conference room for what he called a departure protocol meeting. I expected the usual exit interview formalities, returning keys, signing final paperwork, perhaps a cursory acknowledgement of my years of service. Instead, I found Brian seated with 2 people I'd never seen before. One was introduced as Bright Paw's regional legal counsel, the other as their human resources director. "Before we process your departure, we need to address some concerns," Brian began, his tone formal. "It's come to our attention that you may be planning to open a competing practice in violation of your employment terms." The legal counsel, a stern woman in her 50s, slid a document across the table. "This is a cease and desist letter regarding any plans to practice veterinary medicine within a 20-mile radius of this facility for the period of 1 year." I looked at the document but didn't touch it. I don't recall signing any non-compete agreement. It's incorporated in the transition documents all employees signed when Bright Paw acquired the practice, she replied smoothly. "Actually," I said, reaching into my bag, "I have copies of everything I signed. There was no non-compete clause in any of those documents." I placed my own file on the table. "My lawyer confirmed this yesterday." The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. "Furthermore," I continued, "Kentucky law significantly limits the enforceability of non-competes for medical professionals, including veterinarians, particularly when patient welfare is at stake." The lawyer and HR director exchanged glances. Brian's confident expression faltered. "We're not here to debate legalities," Brian said quickly. "We simply want to ensure a smooth transition for our clients." "Your clients," I corrected him gently. "And I agree completely about ensuring their care isn't disrupted." The HR director, apparently sensing an opportunity to de-escalate, adopted a conciliatory tone. "Dr. Langdon, I understand you've been with this practice for many years. Perhaps we can find a compromise that works for everyone." I smiled. I'm always open to reasonable solutions. What followed was 2 hours of negotiations that eventually resulted in a simple agreement. I would not actively solicit Oakwood's clients for a period of 30 days, and in exchange, Bright Paw would drop any claim to restrict my practice location or timing. By the time we finished, I had officially completed my tenure at Oakwood Animal Clinic. I collected my personal belongings, said my final goodbyes, and walked to my car with a mixture of nostalgia and excitement. As I was pulling out of the parking lot, my phone chimed with a message from Valerie. "Just overheard Brian on the phone with corporate. He said, 'She's just one veterinarian. How much impact could her leaving possibly have?'" I smiled at her message and typed a quick reply. "I guess we'll find out." What Brian and Bright Paw didn't realize was that I wasn't just leaving. I was already 2 steps ahead. The wheels were in motion, and nothing would stop what was coming next. Riverbank Animal Hospital opened its doors exactly 17 days after my departure from Oakwood. The timeline had been ambitious, requiring round-the-clock work, temporary equipment rentals, and a skeleton crew working double shifts. But we made it happen. Thomas joined me as the 2nd veterinarian. Maggie came aboard as our lead technician after her hours at Oakwood were reduced to part-time. Valerie gave her notice the day the new reception desk was installed, citing BrightPaw's hostile work environment in her resignation letter. Our first day was meant to be a soft opening, a chance to test systems with a handful of appointments before a proper launch the following week. I'd only personally called about 20 longtime clients whose pets had ongoing medical needs that I'd been managing. At 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before our official opening, I looked out the front window to an astonishing sight. A line of people and pets stretched across our small parking lot and down the sidewalk. "Did you call all these people?" Thomas asked, eyes wide. "No," I said, stunned. "I only contacted a few with urgent needs." Valerie was already at the reception desk, logging into our new practice management system. "I think word got around," she said with a knowing smile. As we opened the doors, familiar faces poured in. Mrs. Peterson with Baxter the Beagle, the Garcias with their 3 rescue cats, Mr. Johnson and his ancient tortoise Methuselah, clients I'd cared for over years, even decades in some cases. "We saw on the community Facebook page that you were opening today," explained Mrs. Peterson. "No one wanted to miss it." By lunchtime, we'd registered over 70 pets in our new system. By closing, that number had more than doubled. Every client had the same message. They followed their veterinarian, not the clinic brand. What touched me most were the small gestures of support. Clients brought homemade cookies, congratulation cards, and small gifts for the new practice. One family even arrived with pizza for the staff lunch. That evening, as we finally closed the doors after an exhausting but exhilarating day, I received a text from a former colleague still working at Oakwood. "Emergency meeting called for tomorrow morning. Apparently the schedule is suddenly empty." The following weeks exceeded even my most optimistic projections. We quickly had to expand our hours and hire additional staff to accommodate the influx of patients. By the end of our first month, we had registered over 800 pets in our system, approximately 70% of Oakwood's former client base. What surprised me most wasn't the number of clients who followed us, but rather how they found us. We had done minimal advertising, relying primarily on word of mouth and a simple announcement in the local paper. Yet clients kept coming, often mentioning that they'd heard about us from friends, neighbors, or community social media groups. "The neighborhood pet groups have been buzzing about your new place," one client told me as I examined her Labrador puppy. "Everyone's talking about how you stood up to that corporate chain." I hadn't intended to become a symbol of resistance against corporate veterinary care, but somehow that narrative had taken hold. People shared stories about their experiences with BrightPaw's new pricing and protocols, contrasting them with our transparent fees and individualized approach to care. 3 months after opening, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Harrington, my former mentor and the previous owner of Oakwood, came to tour the new practice. "I had to see it for myself," he said, looking around with undisguised approval. "You've created something special here, Jessica." As we walked through the clinic, staff and clients greeted him warmly, many expressing how much they missed him, but how happy they were with the new practice. "I made a mistake selling to BrightPaw," he admitted quietly as we finished the tour. "I should have approached you first." "Everything worked out as it should," I assured him. Later that day, I received an email that brought everything full circle. It was from Brian Hayes, requesting a meeting to discuss the veterinary landscape in Lexington. I smiled as I typed my response. "I'm available next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Nothing personal, just business." Looking around at the thriving practice we'd built, filled with wagging tails, purring patients, and the team I trusted, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't just success, but creating the place you were always meant to be.